Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. Hi there, and welcome to this week's episode, in which I'm going to be speaking to you about the minimum space standards. This may well be something you've heard about before. You may well fully understand the minimum space standards, but I have found that a lot of property investors are not fully aware of the minimum space standards, and importantly, when they do apply and when they don't apply, because as with all of these things, it's not one rule for absolutely everything. There are reasons why the minimum space standards don't always apply to your particular projects. So I'm going to explain them in a little bit more detail. I'm going to go into, I'll give you some indicative numbers, as it were, as far as those minimum space standards are concerned. I'll explain to you when they apply, when they don't. I'll give you some other background around them. And then we'll also talk about how they apply in connection with HMOs, because I know that a lot of people that are investing in HMOs also want to know about minimum space standards and things like that. So the document I'm referring to, and you're welcome to fire this up on the internet, it's relatively easy to find, is called the Technical Housing Standards Nationally Described Space Standard. To be honest, if you just Google minimum space standards, you'll find this document. It's a government document. This one here says it's dated March 2015. I'm not entirely sure. It hasn't been updated since then, but what I'm looking at here is definitely the most up-to-date version. It may well be that actually it was released in 2015, but actually it's been referred to and applied since then. So that could be why there's a little bit of an uncertainty in my mind. But that doesn't really matter for the purposes of this podcast. The interesting part of this document is actually the very last page. It's only a 5-page document, by the way. And as with all government things, there's all sorts of blurb at the front, two pages of information, and then a third page with a table of numbers on it. And if you don't like numbers and Excel and things like that, this is going to be a little bit trickier to read, but you don't necessarily really need to understand the whole of the table. So on page 5 of the document is a table that tells us the minimum gross floor areas and storage that is appropriate for different kinds of property. And it considers property in 2 different ways. One way is how many bedrooms are we putting in our property? And the other way is how many stories is our property over? So are we talking about a single story, what we'd consider it to be a flat? Or are we talking about a 2-story house, 3-story house? It doesn't actually go to 4-story houses. They are very bespoke. And in reality, by the time you got to a 4-story house, you wouldn't really normally have any issues where you couldn't comply with minimum space standards. So we talk about number of stories, 1, 2, or 3, and then ultimately how many bedrooms do we want in our property? 1, 2, 3. It actually goes all the way up to 6 bedrooms. And you might think, yeah, there's not lots of buildings being built with 6 bedrooms, but there are some 6-bedroom properties. Remember that this relates to residential properties, standard C3 residential properties. This doesn't actually relate to HMOs or anything like that. So this is information that is used by house builders, people that are building, or companies that are building brand new houses, brand new blocks of flats. they have to comply with these minimum space standards. And this is policed as part of your planning application or as part of a planning application. So if you're building something brand new, then you need to comply with these minimum space standards. I'll give you some details shortly. If you are converting something from commercial to residential use, then you need to comply with these minimum space standards. If you are converting something that's currently a house and you're converting it to make multiple flats, you have to comply with the minimum space standards because you're creating new dwellings. If you're taking if you're taking I think I've said about commercial to residential, agricultural buildings is another thing that people convert. All of these ones where we create new dwellings that are different from what's there originally, then if we're creating a new dwelling, and I've said that several times because that is important to understand, then these are the requirements that we need to comply with. So if we're creating a new dwelling, if we are reconfiguring an existing dwelling, then we don't need to comply with these minimum space standards. So if we have got an existing one bedroom flat and we move the kitchen into the living room and turn that old kitchen area into a bedroom, because we're not creating a new dwelling, we don't need to comply with the minimum space standards. And what you'll see here is a little bit of an angle here, and I'll perhaps come back to this later on. But the angle is that we can create smaller units as a result of not having to comply with the minimum standards. We've obviously got to make them habitable, but they don't have to comply with the minimum standards. So the difference is if you are creating something new as to if you are reconfiguring something existing. If you've got a shop unit downstairs and you convert that into a flat, then you're creating new, that complies. But if you've got a shop unit downstairs and upstairs has already been converted into two flats, you can just refurbish those flats. It doesn't matter what the size of the flats are. They are flats. They've been used as flats. They can carry on being used as flats. You don't need to meet any minimum standards. But when you do something new, you do. Let me give you some technical information, and you'll probably recognise some of this because you may well have heard people talk about it at property meetings, and it gets mentioned on social media. But this is where it comes from. So some critical numbers that may well be relevant for you. The first thing is that if we create a one bedroom, one story property. So this is effectively saying the smallest property we can create. This is a flat, so a one person, one bedroom, one story flat. Then the minimum space we have to provide is actually 39 square meters. However, in this situation only, if we put a shower in the bathroom rather than a bath, then we now actually only have to deliver at 37 square meters. So you have probably heard people say that the smallest flat, the smallest unit that we can create is 37 square meters. So if you've got a property that is less than 37 square meters, you cannot convert that into a flat without building an extension of some description because it's not going to meet the minimum space standards. Whereas if you've already got a flat that's 35 square meters, no one is going to bat an eyelid about that because it's already there, it's already been built. So 37 square meters is actually quite a significant number to know. It's a bit of an odd measurement. I'm pretty certain, I bet if you worked it backwards, it would come out as a more round number in imperial, in feet and inches. But 37 is what we work to. So the smallest one bedroom flat we can create is 37 square meters. Now, the planning legislation calls that a one person flat. But I have to be honest that and say, if you subsequently sold that as a one bedroom flat and someone came along and put a double bed in it and two people lived in it, no one would bat an eyelid. So it's a really odd little quirk here that we are forced to deliver something, but no one actually ever comes back and checks if it's been used in that way. And by the way, a 37 square meter flat is a good size, is a generous size flat for even two people, one person easily. But it's still a good size flat for two people. So that's the first benchmark we get to effectively 37 square meter for a one bedroom flat. Now, let's say we want to now deliver perhaps we're going to think about doing a one bedroom house. So the size for a one bedroom house, so we've now got a two-story house, so a living room and a kitchen downstairs and a bathroom and a bedroom upstairs, perhaps. The minimum space for that is 58 square meters. So if you've got a flat, if you've got a unit downstairs that is perhaps only 35 square meters, it's not big enough to be a flat. Maybe you need to merge it with the space upstairs so that now we create a house rather than a flat. And you need to see, of course, that your numbers work if you were to deliver that opportunity. So they're one bedroom. I'll just talk about two bedrooms as well, because this is quite important for what we're doing. A two bedroom flat, if we build that as a single story flat, needs to be 61 square meters. So a two bedroom flat is 61 square meters. So look how much extra space you get if you've got just that extra bedroom. We go from 37 square meters to 61 square meters. I think that's 24 square meters more just for an extra bedroom. But of course, the assumption with an extra bedroom is you've now perhaps got a couple and a child. So we've got potentially three people living in the property. If we want to make that over two stories, i.e., a two bedroom house, then we're at 70 square meters. And you can look this document up on the internet and have a look at page 5. You'll see that this goes up through 3, 4, 5, 6 bedroom dwellings and up to, as I said, three-story properties. Most of the time, as property investors and getting started developers, we're talking about flats. And most of the time, we want to get as much out of our space as possible. Let's jump in to make sure that you have everything you need. Now, in a number of these podcasts, you would have heard me talk about my community, and I want to ensure that you know how you can join that community. Obviously, within these podcasts, there's a limit to the detail I can go into the recording, and of course, a lot of things are very generic. So what if you had access to join me on a Zoom call for 90 minutes every single week in a group coaching environment? You could get your questions answered whenever they come up and learn from other members' questions. Plus, you also get 10 hours of training videos, an HMO refurbishment case study, some sample documents and checklists that will help you run your projects far more effectively. Membership of my community is just £89 a month. You get the first month free, and you can also cancel anytime after that. Plus, as a listener of this podcast, there's a promo code to help you save £20 every single month that you remain a member. So just make a note of VIP discount 20, VIP discount 20, all in capital letters, and put that into the checkout. You'll find the checkout on my website, www.refurbishmentmastery.com. Scroll down the page, you'll find the link for the Project Management Accelerator. Use the promo code VIP discount 20 and you'll be signed up at just £69 a month. I look forward to seeing you in that community very, very soon. Now back to the podcast. There's nothing stopping you delivering bigger dwellings than these sizes, of course, and of course that's going to be reflected back in values. I was talking to someone the other day who was thinking about buying a two-bedroom flat that was actually somewhere in the region of 95 square meters. So the minimum space standards say that a two-bedroom flat needs to be 61, and yet this developer was selling the flat at 95. But of course, this wasn't a run-of-the-mill flat. This was the swanky penthouse flat with loads of cupboard space, ensuite and a bathroom and walk-in wardrobes and plenty of space. A very aspirational type property. That was actually being sold as a two-bedroom flat. In theory, under the minimum space standards, you could call that a four-bedroom flat. So you could split it up in a different way and it would be a four-bedroom flat. But this is the market in this particular place. The person that was talking to me about buying this flat didn't want a pokey little flat. They wanted a big aspirational property, and the one they'd found happened to be 95 square meters. So have a look at this table when you can, if you're interested in it. It's not obviously something for everyone, but it is definitely something of use and of interest to us if we're creating new dwellings from fabrics that we've already got, or indeed we're building something from scratch. In the small print, there's a lot more information about how these things work. There's also talk about how much cupboard space we have to provide, and clarity of the number of people that can technically live in these properties. And you can have a look at that, but you don't really need to get too hung up about that. There's a couple of other bits of information, though, that are useful to know. And again, this only relates when we are building or creating new dwellings. It doesn't relate to anything we do to refurbish an existing. But if we create a new dwelling, then what it actually, this says a single bedroom must be at least 7.5 square meters in size and at least 2.15 meters wide. So we can't have really long, skinny corridors and call that a bedroom. And it has to be 7.5 square meters. It also says a double or twin bedroom must have a floor area of 11.5 square meters. It then goes on to say, it talks about adding more rooms and how that works. It says that an area with a headroom of less than 1.5 meters is not counted. Now, that's actually the same number as it comes up in HMO legislation. You'll probably be aware of that already. It talks about how we deal with some storage cupboards under the stairs and things like that. And it also says that, where does it say? Right at the bottom here, the minimum floor to ceiling height should be 2.3 meters for at least 75% of the gross internal area. Now, if you're building something, you're probably going to be at 2.3 meters, but you do need to check this. Where you may have some compromised areas could be up in the roof space, and as long as that's not over 100, over 75% of the internal floor area, you'll be fine with that. So the floor to ceiling height is important, but the bit that's really important to start with is the minimum space standards, and how do we make sure that we meet these dimensions of these minimum standards. So do read the small print, do go to that chart, and you'll understand it in a little bit more depth. But if you're not creating additional dwellings, then this isn't relevant for you at the moment, and you can come back to it perhaps in the future when you are. Now, note that this information I've just given you is nothing to do with the HMO regulations. This is all about the regulations for creating C3 residential units. So it has no bearing on HMOs or sui generis HMOs in any format at all. You need to check your own local HMO space standards and minimum requirements to see that your rooms are compliant. And if you are not building a brand new HMO, then you will need to, you don't need to worry about the sizes of anything as far as the minimum space standards go. You need to worry about the sizes of things in connection with the HMO requirements. So there's a little bit of a sometimes a bit of confusion here. Not only the confusion as to when do this apply and when doesn't it apply, but it also has nothing to do with the HMO regulations, which are just another bunch of regulations that have got very similar requirements to comply with, as far as there are some minimum spaces and some minimum sizes given in there. In my experience, in most cases, the HMO regulations actually accept smaller rooms than the minimum space standards do. So, in reality, if you're building a brand new property to be used as an HMO, you should find you tick all the boxes. The only thing to watch is some local authorities don't actually have what they call a single bedroom and a double bedroom. They just have a bedroom size. And so you won't get away with 6.5, 7.5 square meter bedrooms in those particular areas. Often they're 9.5 or 10, something like that. So don't mix the two up. But in theory, if you're building brand new, you won't have any problems with the HMO regulations if that's what you want to do. But of course, that's something that's going to come up under a planning application and a planning review anyway. Where you might find this knowledge really useful is if you're looking at properties that can potentially be converted, whether that is something as I was talking about, maybe a shop with some space above. Now you know that you've got to create a unit that's 37 square meters. If the building you've got at the moment is not 37 square meters, then you know that you've got to extend. If by the time you've taken the staircase out, the space above the shop is not 37 square meters, then you know you can't convert that into a flat. Maybe you've got to look at doing it into a duplex over 2 stories and picking up on other dimensions. And I was offered a property only 18 months, 2 years ago, maybe, where I built up a relationship with the owner of a shop. He wanted to sell the shop and retire. He was looking to looking to kind of exit everything completely. And I was talking to him about taking the shop, putting that into my pension fund, and converting. And I asked him if there was a chance of converting upstairs. He said, "Oh yeah, all the rest of the terrace have converted upstairs. Everywhere has got 2 flats above their shops except mine. I never got round to doing it. There's really easy access to the rear. You build a staircase up onto a flat roof, and then you can get into a flat there, and then you put another staircase up to get to the top floor flat." And it was like, wow, this is great. And this fella's talking to me. It's not in the open market. Here's a really good opportunity. Went and had a look at it, and the floor areas upstairs were only about 32, 33 square meters or so. They were some way short of the 37. And I said to him, look, unfortunately, this just doesn't work. I can't convert this into 2 flats because of these minimum space standards. And he said, everyone else in the terrace has converted theirs. And I said, but when did they convert them? Did they convert them before this date? And at that point, it was only 18 months earlier or so that the government had brought in this legislation. And sure enough, they'd all been converted for quite a while. So the value of this fella's property had dropped massively because we had to then consider converting it into a duplex, which I wasn't really sure there was a market for a duplex in the area. The numbers certainly didn't really work. The owner wasn't particularly excited about it. He was off to try and find a loophole. I don't think he ever did. So do be careful of units that are too small. Now, where you can also use this is if you find a bigger unit, let's say you find a commercial unit that's got scope for multiple dwellings. Well, now we can say, if we've got a large floor area, we can say we need some of that space for entrance area and communal circulation space. Let's take off 10% for that. And now we've got this space left. We can say, well, how many times does 37 go into that? That will give us an idea of how many flats we're going to get. Don't ever round it up because you're going to end up with some flats that are bigger than 37, but it will give you an idea as to how many flats you might get from a unit that you're looking at. So it's actually quite useful information to have. And if you've got a really big space, then the figure that I use a lot is actually 50 square meters, because if we say it's 39 for a one bedroom and 61 for a two bedroom, the average of that is 50 square meters. So if I'm looking at a big building, I'll say, how many times does 50 go into this? Because I know I'm going to have some one bedrooms and some two bedrooms. And that gives me a bit of a, again, a bit of a rough idea. So that's when this information can become really useful to you, to just be able to work something out quite quickly, just from from a viewing. If you take a tape measure, take an electronic measure, you can check some of these dimensions quite quickly and see how many of these units you might get from the footprint you've got. Do be careful of irregular shaped footprints, because you can't obviously have flats that are irregular shapes, but by and large, it will give you a little bit of an idea. But so just to wrap up, the important thing to note is everything I've just spoken about only applies if you are building or creating brand new residential units, whether that's from existing residential, existing commercial, or a green field. It's when you are creating new dwellings. If you're reconfiguring, refurbishing existing dwellings, those dimensions don't apply, and you can do whatever you like by and large, but it's when you come to create new ones. So hopefully that's helped you understand the difference between the times where you need to know the minimum space standards and the times where they're not relevant. And I have just touched on the HMO regulations as well, because they don't fall under this legislation at all. But there is some crossover, and I know some people get mixed up there. So all the best when you're out there looking for your opportunities. That magic number of 37 square meters, ingrain that in your mind. And when you see potential opportunities to convert, the question is, how many 37s can I get from this space? And that will give you a good head start to work out how much you can get from any particular opportunity. All the best, and I'll catch up with you on another podcast soon.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share, and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.